Broken down into three phases: sowing, growing and harvesting, three stage. So the three phases of this insurance are supposed to by and large match the three phases of the crop cycle. Each phase is a separate unit in itself, and separate triggers or the level of rainfall below which the payout will start. All the three of the three stages have separate triggers, and in this particular product which we have offered, the third stage covers excess rainfall, and the first two phases cover deficit rainfall only.
One innovation in this project was to introduce the product to landless laborers. They're very dependent on the weather because if there's no crop to harvest, nobody will hire them, and they have little other choice to work in the area. They're usually obliged to migrate far away. One trade-off we face in the insurance policy is a trade-off between the complexity of the product and the transparency of the instrument. So, for example, if the policy just paid 1,000 rupees if rainfall was above 200 millimeters and nothing if it were below that level, then the product would be very simple. People would be able to understand it, but it wouldn't be a great product. It's better for them to provide a more continuous payout scale that compensates them to the degree of loss they receive. But then the product gets more complicated. You have to explain for each 5 millimeters rainfall deficit, you get an extra 10 rupees or an extra 30 rupees, and it becomes much harder. So one experiment we did in the fields was to try and mimic the situation that the farmers faced.
30 રૂપિયા મળે બરાબર પણ જો 100 મિલીમીટરથી 150 મિલીમીટર વરસાદ પડ્યો હોય તો ઇન્સ્યોરન્સ કંપની તમને વળતર ના આપે કેમ કે બહુ સારું કહેવાય વરસાદ એટલે તમારે વળતરની જરૂર જ ના પડે એટલે તમારે હવે નક્કી કરવાનું તમારે વીમો લેવો છે કે નથી લેવો લેવો છે વીમો એટલે આ કાયમી વીમો નથી ખાલી ગેમ પૂરતો જ તે બરાબર અને ગેમ તમે વીમો લઈને પણ ગેમ રમી શકો છો અને વીમો ના લેવો હોય તો પણ તમે પછીથી પણ ગેમ રમી શકો છો ના વીમો લેવો છે તમારે સારું તો આ 30 રૂપિયા તમારે ભરવાના રહેશે પાછા બરાબર છે હવે આપણે ગેમ ચાલુ કરીશું પત્તું ખેંચો હા પત્તું ખેંચી લો તમે 130 મિલીમીટર વરસાદ પડ્યો બરાબર તો તમને મજૂરીના કેટલા મળે મેં તમને પહેલા સમજાવ્યું ને ભૂલી ગયા 110 મિલીમીટરથી 140 મિલીમીટર 150 મિલીમીટર વરસાદ પડ્યો હોય તો મજૂરીના 2 અઠવાડિયા મજૂરી મળે અને કેટલા મળે 60 રૂપિયા બરાબર હવે તમે ઇન્સ્યોરન્સ લીધો છે 130 મિલીમીટર વરસાદ એટલે ઘણો સારું કહેવાય વરસાદ એટલે ઇન્સ્યોરન્સ કંપની તમને વળતર ના આપે પણ તમને મજૂરીના તમારા 60 રૂપિયા મળે બરાબર છે એટલે આ 60 રૂપિયા તમને મળશે અહીંયા આપણી ગેમ પૂરી થઈ ગઈ બરાબર છે.
So to some people we offered a very complicated insurance policy that was actually better suited. So if you stepped back as an economist and you analyzed this policy, you'd say, no, this is the best policy because the payments varied continuously and it hedged against different types of risks that were in the packs of cards. And then we also offered them a simple insurance policy that wasn't quite as attractive from a theoretical perspective, but it was much more transparent. And we found then that people preferred to buy the simple policy. We'd like to extend this result and see if education can be effective. So if we spend some time explaining them how they might evaluate the product, weigh the pros and cons, would they then prefer the superior product, or would they still prefer the inferior product because it's more simple? So by learning how consumers think about insurance contracts, we can better understand how to design the insurance contracts and how to market them. Everybody in the village is dependent on rainfall because they all work on a farm or have income-generating activities that are related to agriculture. So if there's a terrible drought or horrible flood, everybody suffers, and there's nobody to turn to for help. This is exactly the type of risk that finance theory tells us should be diversified. People in the U.S. Should be willing to take on this risk because it's uncorrelated with the stock market or other types of their assets. But traditionally that's not been possible because it's been too expensive to write a contract where somebody in the U.S. or some Swiss insurance company takes on farmer or laborer's risk. However, with the advent of index-based weather insurance, the contracting costs have come down so low that it's possible for anybody to take on this risk. And I'm actually pretty excited by this. I could see in the future that there could be just a general risk market where farmers could purchase insurance, and people on the other side of the contract may be insurance companies, or even well-wishers in the United Kingdom or the U.S. who could say, I'm going to take $100 of weather insurance risk at a compensation of maybe an expected return of 5%, and I'm happy to do this because it gives me as much return as my savings. It's a very small amount of money for me. But then the farmer on the other side of the transaction in India, who could be connected through simple electronic markets, would be able to hedge this risk.
Can we adapt the product to our members' needs without the research? Then I think it is a trial and error that one will have to go through, and you cannot play with a poor woman and her household's minimal income, and therefore we feel that the research is really, really very important.
The state of Orissa has around 5% of the total population in India, and it is one of the poorest states. In 2000, if you look at the malaria cases in India, there were around 200,000, out of which 100,000 alone were falciparum cases, which is a cerebral malaria. Orissa alone accounts for more than 62% of the malaria deaths in the country.
There is a very strong association between the regular use of ITNs, insecticide-treated bed nets, and a reduction in malaria incidents. On one hand, leads to the consequence that you are not bitten by a mosquito, which can potentially transmit malaria to you. If you do have malaria and you sleep under a bed net, a mosquito will not bite you, and so it's also less likely that you will transmit malaria to somebody else through the mosquito itself. It's also been shown that something else which is extremely important is not only to sleep regularly under a bed net, but also to treat these bed nets with chemicals. And of course the reason here is the fact that if you simply sleep under an untreated net, you are not bitten if you use it properly, but if you also use chemicals, mosquitoes die almost instantly, depending also on what kind of chemical you use. But so a further reason why use of ITNs may reduce malaria incidence is that you can kill 20, 30, 40, hundreds of mosquitoes every night, depending on how many mosquitoes there are in the area. Microfinance can really help increase